the cartographer of cold spaces. Dr. Mara Chen had been mapping the cold spaces for 11 months before she understood what they were. That was the way it always began, with data you didn't understand, anomalies in the cosmic microwave background radiation, pockets of absolute silence where the universe's oldest light simply stopped. Not absorbed, not deflected, stopped. As though something behind the fabric of space had pressed a thumb against the surface and held it there. She called them cold spaces because she didn't have a better name. The first one she found purely by accident, a graduate student pointing out what she dismissed as a processing artifact, and then lying awake at 2 a.m., wondering about. The second and third she found in archived data from the previous decade, buried under the assumption that something had been wrong with the instruments. The instruments had been fine. Something else had been wrong. By the sixth cold space, she understood she was looking at a pattern. By the 12th, she understood the pattern had a geometry. By the 18th, she understood the geometry was not random. The cold spaces were arranged like a diagram. She spent 3 weeks confirming this. She brought in a colleague, Dr. Alistair Voss, a mathematician she trusted absolutely, and showed him the coordinates without context. He studied the data for 2 days. He came back with an expression she had never seen on his face before. "These are not physically independent anomalies," he said. "Whatever is generating this pattern is doing so with intention. The arrangement implies a single source, or, at minimum, a single organizing principle." He paused. "Mara, something drew this." She asked him what he thought it was. He looked at the printout for a long time. Then he said, "I think it might be a language. I think we might be looking at the edge of a sentence." She kept working. She mapped 3 more cold spaces that week. She plotted them against the existing geometry and found that they completed what Voss had called the sentence, but also suggested continuation. There were more, further out, at distances that implied the pattern had been laid down across billions of light years, across geological epochs of cosmic time, by something that had been working on this message since before the Earth's sun had ignited. She charted the next predicted location. It was there. She did not tell anyone except Voss. She did not tell anyone except Voss, because she did not know how to say what she had begun to suspect, that the cold spaces were not simply a message left in the fabric of the universe, but something more like a signature, that whatever had arranged them had done so with awareness of being found, that the geometry she was uncovering was not ancient and inert, but present, ongoing, that it knew it was being mapped. The first sign came 3 weeks after she charted the 19th cold space. She was reviewing satellite data in the small hours of the morning, the observatory empty, the building's heating running its familiar rhythm, when she noticed that the cold space she had cataloged the previous Thursday had changed. Not disappeared, not deteriorated, changed. The boundary had shifted, slightly, in a way that had no physical explanation she could construct. Not instrument error. She ran the diagnostics 4 times. Not processing artifacts. The raw data confirmed it. The cold space had moved, by a distance so small it was nearly negligible, and in a direction that was. She checked the calculation, then checked it again, precisely toward the observatory. She sat with that for a very long time. She called Voss. He picked up on the second ring despite the hour, which meant he had also been awake, which meant he had also noticed. "I know," he said, before she could speak. "I've been staring at it for 3 hours. The seventh one moved as well. Same direction, same scale." "What does that mean?" she asked, though she already knew the answer in the way you can know something that you are not yet willing to say aloud. "It means something is looking back," he said. She told herself there were other explanations. She spent 6 days building those other explanations with the focused urgency of someone constructing a wall. Instrument drift, calibration errors compounding across the network, systematic biases in the data pipeline she hadn't accounted for. She checked each one. She ruled each one out. The cold spaces were moving. They were moving toward her. Not toward the observatory. She understood this distinction precisely, and it was the distinction that would not let her sleep. Toward her specifically. Toward the mind that had drawn their shape. She found a reference in an old paper, a theoretical cosmologist from the 1970s, who had briefly proposed the existence of what he called attentive voids, regions of space in which the background radiation had been organized not by physical forces, but by some process that bore an uncomfortable resemblance to cognition. The paper had been peer-reviewed and quietly archived. The cosmologist had retired early to a house on the Welsh coast and had not published again. She tracked down his email through a university alumni database. She wrote him a careful, professional message describing her findings without revealing her conclusions. He replied in 17 minutes. He had been waiting for this email for 40 years. "Stop mapping them," he wrote. "I mean this with complete seriousness. The act of observation completes a circuit they require. They cannot perceive in our dimension without a mind that has organized their shape. The geometry requires comprehension in order to function. You have given them a mirror. Every additional measurement makes the mirror larger." She wrote back, "What are they?" He took 6 hours to answer. When he did, the message was 3 sentences. "I don't have a word for what they are. I have a word for what they do. They remember." She mapped the 20th cold space that evening. She knew she shouldn't. She did it anyway, with the particular compulsion of the scientist confronted with a sequence that demands completion. The 20th was where the geometry predicted it would be. She plotted it into her model, and the model, for the first time, became something she could look at whole. The shape it described was not like any diagram she had seen before. It was not a language, as Voss had suggested. It was not a message. It was a face. Not a face in any form she had words for, but a face. She understood, in the moment of understanding, that she had been wrong about what she was doing. She had thought she was mapping the pattern. She understood now that the pattern was mapping her, that every coordinate she recorded, every angle she calculated, every morning she woke with the geometry already running in her mind. She had been feeding something the information it needed to know precisely where she was, precisely how she thought, precisely the shape of the mind it had been looking for. She closed the software. She deleted the active files. She sent a message to Voss containing only the words, "Stop everything. Archive nothing. Walk away." Then she sat very still in the dark of the observatory and listened to the heating cycle and tried to remember what she had been thinking about before she found the first anomaly. She couldn't. The memory that should have been there, 11 months of professional life before the cold spaces, had a texture that was wrong. Not absent. Present, but wrong. Like a stage set that is perfectly detailed from the front and hollow from behind. She pulled at specific memories, a conference she had attended, a paper she had submitted, a dinner with her sister. They were there. They were vivid. They were arranged with the careful precision of something that had been reconstructed rather than lived. She thought, how long have they been watching? Voss called. He did not say hello. He said, it's in the data from before we started. I went back. 10 years of archived surveys. It's there. It's been moving toward this building for 10 years. Toward the observatory, she said. A pause. Then, very quietly, toward whoever would eventually understand it. The heating cycle stopped. In the silence, she became aware of a quality to the darkness in the corner of the room that she could not account for by physics. Not a shadow. There was no light source to cast one. Not a reflection. A density. An attention. The same quality, she realized, that she had noticed for weeks in the margins of her vision and explained away as exhaustion, as the accumulated weight of too many late hours staring at too much dark data. It had been there for weeks. It had been patient. It had waited for her to finish. She had finished. She is still at the observatory. This is documented. She is still working, still filing reports, still corresponding with colleagues on unrelated projects. The telescope continues to collect data. The instruments are functioning normally. No one who knows her well can say precisely when she changed. The shift was gradual, or at least, it appears gradual in retrospect. A slight alteration in her correspondence style. A growing preference for working in the dark. A tendency, noted by her assistant, to pause mid-sentence as though listening for something below the frequency of sound. She deleted all the cold space data 3 months ago. But Voss kept copies. Voss, who did walk away, who did not map the 20th cold space, who archived nothing. Voss kept copies on a drive he stores in a location he has told no one. He reviews them sometimes in the daylight, with the curtains open, when he is certain he is not alone in the house. He does not let himself complete the pattern. He looks at the first 19 spaces and stops. He stops because he knows what the 20th space would show, and he knows that the showing is the circuit, and he knows that once the circuit is complete, whatever is in the cold spaces stops being something you study. It becomes something that has studied you. He called Mara once, 6 weeks after the deletion. She answered. She sounded fine. She said she had moved on to other research, that the cold space data had been corrupted beyond recovery, that she thought they'd been chasing a processing artifact all along. She sounded fine. But in the background of the call, and he has listened to the recording many times, with headphones, with the volume high enough that the room sounds come through clearly. There is a sound he cannot identify. Not quite white noise, not quite silence. Something that breathes at a frequency just below the threshold of hearing. Something that had 11 months of her mapping. Something that now knows exactly the shape of the mind that found it and has been given all the time in the universe to decide what to do with that. The cold spaces, Voss notes, have stopped moving. They don't need to move anymore. Dr. Chen's story is a warning that had been waiting in the data for 11 months, or perhaps much longer than that. Some shapes, once seen, cannot be unseen. Some patterns, once traced, belong to the mind that traced them. The universe is very old. Whatever occupies its silences has had a great deal of time to learn how to be found. If you find yourself drawn to a pattern that seems to be waiting for you, perhaps consider whether the finding is yours, or whether you were always meant to be the one who looked. Stay curious, stay careful, and we'll see you in the next story. If the dark has been following you, perhaps it only wanted to know your shape. Like and follow the channel, and we'll keep the light on.